Hi, I'm Peter Jack, commonly known to my customers as the Whip Man. I am New Zealand's #1 whip maker currently, basically being the last. I could make the whip to suit the person. I could tailor the person's knowledge to what they needed, whether it be film work, whether it be training, whether it be stockman work. They also asked me could they be shown how to work a whip. So I passed on my knowledge, therefore I became a trainer. I could make the whip to suit the person. I could tailor the person's knowledge to what they needed, whether it be film work, whether it be training, whether it be stockman work. So therefore I am today a production of all those years of putting together the teaching, the learning, the making, and the people that I have connected with me have taught me and I have taught them. I have produced this video primarily to show beginners how to use a whip safely. We will be covering all aspects of whip use and whip care. I'll be showing you 5 basic whip cracking techniques and their further development, how to move from one style of whip crack to the next, to develop combinations, and I will be isolating certain key issues on how to use a whip and how the hand and the arm and all of the body motion goes in conjunction with the whip. There will also be a section on how to do basic care of your whip. Doing work with your whip is the most important thing you can do. Whether you're a stockman, whether you're a performer, whether you're just an enthusiast or a trainer, these particular parts of the whip and the motion of the body all go together to create a flow, a motion, almost like dancing. For this next section of the video, which is the learning section of the 5 basic whip cracks, I will be using white whips, which are easier to see. Just gently place the whip into the meaty part of your hand here. The ball should sit just in there. We just grasp gently and the thumb can be placed on the shaft, allowing for good positioning of the thumb. So therefore, wherever your thumb is, you know the shaft of the whip is. So it tells you in your mind. You must always start with the Circus performer's crack with the whip behind when you're first learning. So, starting with it behind you, that means that we can now drag the whip up in the air, dragging it across the ground, lifting our arm up, as you will see. Then we don't need a lot of muscle to bring it back down again. I'll bring it up to the vertical position, like so, and once that vertical position is reached, the whip will trail out behind you. The whip doesn't touch the ground. When you draw it forward, you will be throwing a loop in the whip. Throwing a loop in the whip. I'm not pulling my arm, I'm not wrenching at it, I'm not throwing the whip into the ground. I'm allowing the whip to roll, to roll. Notice with my arm that I bend at the elbow coming down. Straight. I bent at a point, my arm was completely vertical, and then at that point I started to pull my elbow down and then straighten my arm coming down to the rest position, which is down by your side. I started in there, I'll end up out there. That means that the whip is clear to move away from the body. And at this point, if you're moving ever slightly away from the body, you can therefore drag the whip through and it doesn't touch the body. It is quite important that we don't break at the wrist too hard. I'm just throwing the loop down the whip. So when you're first learning, keep quite a rigid wrist and use your thumb. The thumb has a better point. The next whip crack I'm going to show you is the horizontal crack or the side loops. For this whip crack, we must start with the whip in front. We must lift the whip up very much like a tennis serve. And once the whip is in the air, it can be thrown forward to a side loop which can wrap around objects. If you look at my arm position, notice my wrist is facing forward now. so that we have less wrist rotation. When we wrist rotate, the whip flicks. So if we start with our wrist facing forward, and it always stays in that position, now we lift the whip up like we would with a tennis serve. That this would be a tennis racket. We lift it up, the whip is in the air, and we throw it forward. It's very important that we relate to the whip travelling in a straight line. We don't swing it around because the whip will come behind us. So we must lift the whip up and then throw it like we would be throwing in a straight line. We don't grasp the whip heavily, we relax with it so that the whip now will trail itself out. It'll pull itself to where you want to crack it. The next whip crack I'm going to show you is the vertical crack or the drop crack. It is similar to the side loop in that we must have the whip in the air to start with, but instead of drawing it horizontally, we are going to bring it down vertically. We want the whip to travel straight down rather than feathering and floating. We draw the whip up and then we drop it down. We start with the wrists slightly forward so that we don't have the wrist rotation problems which are the mechanics of the arm. It is inevitable that if you have your wrist facing like that you will roll your arm, the whip will follow. So if we start with your wrist facing forward, we don't have the possibility of you flicking the whip behind you. Watch the rotation of my shoulder. Notice that my shoulder moves backwards, then forwards. This is again a mechanics of the body so that we maintain as straight a line as possible on the whip. The straighter we get it, the better the crack. The next whip crack I'm going to show you is the back curl. Important we start with the whip out front. I'm going to rotate my arm and drive my elbow down and roll my wrist, as you can see. Then I will be lifting the whip up to lay back down behind me again. That is the whip completion, the actual crack completion. We curl and we lay it down. We will lift it up, and if you noticed I threw a loop in the whip. To actually speed that up to get a crack out of it, all we do is travel a little bit further faster, and that's what happens. A little bit further forward and a little bit faster. The whip starts out from the body and moves ever slightly inwards towards my body. That means that the whip will be free, not to bind. My arm is a little bit further out now, and I'll draw it ever slightly in. I don't want to put it right by my side because then the whip will compromise my body. So, the fifth whip crack I'm going to show you is the Stockmans whip crack. For this one, it is in a circular motion around our body. We pick the whip up and we rotate it around our head, just above the top of your head. It's quite important that you actually rotate with the wrist a little bit. That tells the thumb and the mind where the whip shaft is. You must rotate with the wrist slightly. When we are going to do the whip crack, practicing with the open hand, probably the best thing you can do without holding the whip. Okay, so I'm rotating with the open hand. Now the whip crack occurs when the hand is flat on top of the head and the wrist is facing down as such. That motion of me changing the direction of the whip and pulling backwards against the grain and rotating with my shoulder. And now the flat of the hand, notice the flat of my hand stays flat. That is exactly how you do it. Now we grasp the whip and we do that. We rotate and pulling down slightly on the shoulder. Wind it a little bit. You don't have to wind it hard or fast, just a little bit. By cutting down on a slight angle, it means that the whip will cut free of itself. And I come down to about shoulder level. I'm above my head here, then I come down to shoulder level. It can be done without rotating as well. Notice I point the shaft at the ground. That's the quickest way to stop a whip. This next section I'm going to show you developments on each individual crack. We're going to develop your style, your technique. Now at this point, notice my thumb, big part of the whip. We haven't talked about it so much before, but in New Zealand we use the thumb push instead of the wrist drop. The thumb push on a whip, or the triggering of a whip, is the fundamental to good style, good technique. It relies less on the power of the arm and more on the control of the thumb. It allows you to sight a little bit better rather than relying on dragging the whip through space, hopefully all in that same place. Using the thumb push means go there. The whip should be just in this position in the hand so that the ball is just in the meaty part of the hand, and I'm really grasping with these two fingers just enough to hold the whip, to stop it from falling out of my hand. The others just go on guiding, just so they sit there. And now the thumb sits just gently so that it allows a rocking motion. I now create a fulcrum point, and when I use the thumb to push it, push, which sends a bolt of energy down the whip. So if we were doing the circus performer's crack, I will now take my thumb off the whip so that you can actually see. And watch what my thumb does. Push, off. Initially when I started the whip crack, the thumb was off. Then there was a time when it was on the shaft. Then there was the time when I pushed and took my thumb off and relaxed my hand. Very sharp, less power is needed with the arm when you use the thumb push. The thumb push or triggering of the whip in the side loop or horizontal. Notice my thumb is off. I'm showing you all of these whip cracks with my thumb off. Most of the whip cracks are accentuated that the thumb is really off, really on, really off. It really should be just lightly touching so that you can push it. So you don't have to do it with your thumb off a whip. In this section I'll be dealing with further developments of the whip cracks, moving from one technique to the next, using the energy that we have thrown into the whip to take us from one technique to the next. Now, we'll deal with the circus performer's crack. If we start with the whip in front, as in the last section we had it behind, this time we've got it in front. Now, the key to here is that we can draw the whip back and form a loop coming off the ground. Watch what happens when I drag the whip and then I throw ready to come up to the Circus Performance crack. It throws a loop. Now we can put the two together. The drawing back of the whip and the lifting of the whip to go into a Circus Performance crack. There we have three cracks, three distinct cracks, because of the very motion of the whip. Now that we've learnt the lifting up of the Circus Performance crack, we can now put the back curl into the Circus Performance crack. We therefore will lift the whip up again, like I just showed you, and then throw it into the back curl. Now the back curl naturally occurs because of the weight of the whip in the Circus Performance crack is being pulled back. So if you just roll your wrist back, it will roll the whip back for you. I'm going to perform the pickup of the Circus Performance crack, going into a back curl and then keeping going, coming forward for the Circus Performance crack again, and then a back curl. Next is a horizontal crack, showing you the retrieval of energy and being able to position it for a next crack, which will be the Stockmans crack. So we pick the whip up, side loop, and then back in the Stockmans crack. When you're first learning this particular crack, you are better to actually lay the whip out, circle the head a couple of times, then do the Stockmans crack. Further development on the horizontal or side loop with the Stockmans crack is taking it on a 45-degree angle and creating a cross. So it goes like this. We now, with the horizontal, it is generally on the horizontal. If we take it now on a 45-degree, it now has a 45-degree cut. So the Stockmans crack can do the same in return. So it's a 45 cut there. There is two 45-degree cuts. That, commonly known in New Zealand, is called crossing. Now with this particular crack, I was showing you two styles put together, can keep going in a perpetual momentum. If you feel that the momentum is not working to come around for the horizontal 45-degree cut, again, drag the whip on the ground, like you would be starting off for the very first time. You'll find dragging the whip across the ground will stabilise the position of your whip to move into the next crack. When I'm crossing, I'm using a subtle thumb push to tell the whip to go there on the crossing motion. The horizontal crack, or the drop crack, and the back curl. And it goes like this. It's very important that the flow is very similar to that of the Circus Performers crack, except for where we are doing the drop crack, then doing the tuck. When you're doing this particular combination, that the drop crack speeds it up quite fast, so the comeback for the back curl is faster than if you were doing the Circus Performers crack. The horizontal or the side loop moving into a snake combination of side loops. Now, a point to note now is that the side loop motion is generally one single loop. Now, there's no reason why you can't do two motions. So we do one after the other, those side loop motions, turning and rotating the body so that the momentum of the body will take away the whip from your body. The side loop or horizontal with a snake. which will give me 2 cracks. The first thing in basic maintenance is you must wax your whip a little bit. We make a compound, a special compound, which is a beeswax compound. The first part, the butt of the whip and the knots, don't need waxing. In fact, if you do wax them, the knots can go loose. So we generally start from above the first knot on the shaft. We always run the wax down the whip, running in the grain of the whip as it would be dragged or moved across the ground. I'll take a small amount of wax and I'll rub it, rubbing down the whip, travelling down, forever pulling and stretching the whip. It pays not to put too much wax or oil on the knots. It still won't hurt it too much if you do rub a little wax on every now and then, just a very light coating. This is the most important part. The fall, the tail, or the lash, we must keep that well waxed. So we're rubbing it right down to the tip, avoiding the knot on the tip as well. Now if it's quite dirty at this point, wipe it down and it pulls off all of the dirt that may build up. Basic lubricating of a Stockman's whip in the keeper joint. Open it out as much as you can and get some wax in and around the keeper joint so that it lubricates that area. I'd like to show you a few tips. One of them is how to replace a fall or tail, and another one will be also showing you how to replace onto a new fall a cracker. Okay, take a fid or some kind of sharpened metal object that is not sharp on the side but sharpened at the point. Insert the fid just behind the leather of your tail or fall and open it up, making sure that you don't pick up any other parts of the knot, just the end of the fall. Now we will cut the loop with a sharp knife, cutting over the top of the fid so that you don't cut any other part of the knot. And as you can see, I have now cut through that loop. We now run down the old fall and we will slide on the new fall, making sure that the grain, which is the nice smooth skin side, is facing running down the fall. So all we do now is open up this knot here, as you can see. We now step on the whip and we grab a good hold of the tail and we pull it out. This is the front of the knot. You can see where the knot has been created here. This is the back of the knot. You can see that there is a hole where the back of the knot is, where I pulled out the old fall tail. So now I'm going to insert the pointed section of the new one, and then we grab that point and we pull it. Now making sure that we line it up so that it's going to run through properly, we now step on the whip again and we grab a good hold of the tail and we slide it up. Right, now we're at this stage where, with my particular type of knot, I put a little back keeper here. So making sure that you loop up and pick up with your thumb and hold it and then pull like so, and it pulls the new tail fall into place. And we'll shave off all bits that are sticking out to make it as low profile as possible. We're now going to take the end and put a new cracker on. So we take your cracker, we open up the eye like that. We now form a loop in the end of the new tail so that the end of the tail sits over the top of itself like so. We now pass the cracker through and we pick up the end like so. At this point we can pull it up tight, making sure that it slides in and it'll pull up tight like that. That knot means that it's non-removable once it's pulled very, very tight. do that again so that you can see it again. Form a loop over the top of itself. We now just open up the cracker, pass it through, pick up the end like so, and at this stage, instead of just pulling it up tight, let's pull the leather tail. So now the knot is forming in the cracker instead of the tail. Now at this point we can, between our thumb and finger, we can take the knot and pull it tight, and it now locks on. The more we have on the end here, the excess, the more possibilities that the actual tail cracker will float or feather as you're working your whip. Feathering means that it floats around like this without dropping down straightly. I'm just going to show you quickly also how to store a whip. A stock whip has a joint here, an elbow joint, which means that it lends itself easily to just sitting. We allow the thong to fall down and we just hitch it over the top, as so. So therefore we've got a reasonably smooth running of the thong. Now with a bullwhip, this is what the loop's for on the end. If you haven't got a stand, you can just roll it up, not too tightly, and allow it to sit like that. Of course with this position, if the whip is wet, it was very wet when you do this, it does tend to remember the shape that you put it in. By the time I let it out again, it's going to remember it and it's going to have a kink. If the whip was wet, to hang it straight in some way or lay it straight on the ground. Out of the 300 different types of whip I make, I will briefly describe the whip types. The target bullwhip, which is a very classical looking bullwhip, American style. The stock whip, which is a very finely braided Australian style stock whip. The Zenith bullwhip, which is my own design, designed off many other styles of whips, all put together into one. The snake whip, which is basically a Stockman's whip with the handle taken off. The Stockman's whip itself, which is what a stockman would use. And the pocket whip, finally, which is just a small whip which you can roll up and fit into your pocket. For optimum performance, tune your whip with one of my specially designed crackers or poppers. Spare falls and tails are available. I have created a range of beeswax leather dressings that complement my custom-made whips. Well, we've been through quite a lot of different styles, techniques, combinations, building combinations and flow. I can't stress enough at this time that feeling the whip is the most important. You must feel the flow of the whip, feel the rhythm. It has a speed that it likes to travel at. So I suggest that you watch the whip where it is going, by one means or another, whether you're looking into a mirror, using your own shadow. Use that and see what is happening. Watch the whip. And link to the flow. It's more magical when you do it with your eyes closed. You see that? There, ready? One shot. One shot. Go.